July 1915. Frank Willis is in a training camp just south of Sydney. He mentions that one of my tent mates got his ankle broken. There are 3 or 4 mounted parades now, and most of the horses are really very spoilt, so they're not a great pleasure to ride. However, the point in this section of July 1915 is that was the day, 30th of July, that the first Australia Day celebration took place in Australia. That Australia Day celebration was a fundraiser for the war effort. And it is important that we realise that the roots of Australia Day have nothing to do with the 26th of January. Taking place in August 1915, the Victorian Education Department requested numerous times that the teachers and pupils collect a particular animal. The leech. One article expressed leeches were beneficial for relieving bruising as well as for pain in the back that accompanied pneumonia. Leeches were not fed before their application to the patient, and once they had gorged themselves, they were discarded. The Teachers Association in Victoria, in conjunction with the Education Department, published articles encouraging the collecting of leeches. Women and girls were compelled to knit for the troops abroad. Woolen socks, scarves and balaclavas. They knitted in groups at home, in churches, on public transport, anywhere and anyhow knitting was acceptable. If knitting needles broke, they improvised by using bicycle spokes. When they no longer could obtain dyed wool, they dyed it themselves with whatever came to hand, from onion skins and tree barks. As the war progressed and things got tighter, they began spinning their own wool. July 1915. They are taking almost anyone now, whether they have false teeth or not. I saw one fella come in today with only 2 fingers on his right hand, and some of the tiny little fellas are only bits of kiddies, but I guess they will be needed before it's ended. Recruiting had really slowed up, and the minimum age had risen from 38 to 45, but also the height had dropped to 5'2". New men were needed to replace the dead and injured. The government increased its propaganda campaign. Many women requested to be part of the war effort in a practical way, but they were restricted in their requests, most exclusively to women's work, such as nursing, cooking, washing and mending. A few women offered their services as drivers, scouts and interpreters. Their requests peaked in mid-1915, at the same time as the great recruiting campaigns escalated. None of the applicants were successful, as the Department of Defence adopted a policy against employing a female in any military capacity. Nurses were the exception. Australian troops were transported all over the world in early 1916. Infantry battalions were transferred from Egypt to France via Marseille, and then railed across France to the front. Convoys of ships carried boys to training grounds on the Salisbury Plain. However, Frank Willis remained in Egypt with the Light Horse. He was involved in the Battle of Romani. Frank sustained himself during the battle. However, when the battle was over, a stray bullet took Frank's life. And this is an interesting story because on the night of the 4th of August, Frank's dog at home in Crookwell, Frank's dog called Nigger at home in Crookwell, we will add, howled all night. In the morning, he was gone, missing, and never seen again. The Willis family suspected that something had happened to Frank, and this was correct. And I will read from a letter that his dear friend, Mr. Baines Lee, wrote in relation to Frank's death. Just before daylight, the Turks made several wild charges and got up to within a few yards of us in places. But fortunately we were able to stop them with rapid rifle and machine gun fire. And as it got lighter, shrapnel began to fall pretty thick. About 8 a.m, the infantry were all in position, and we got the order to retire to a position away from where we'd been, as it was too hot to hold. By this time, we'd lost several splendid mates. But Frank was all right and was beside me when we pulled up in a place of comparative safety. About midday, camels with fresh water arrived, and Frank, whose bottle was empty, gave me his horse to hold while he went over to fill it. He'd not been gone 5 minutes when one of our troop told me that Frank was shot. I could hardly believe it at first and ran over to see if it was true. It appears he was sitting on a fantasia, which is a water container carried by camels, talking to several others, when a stray bullet came over the hill and shot him through the head. Christmas 1914. Princess Alexandra sent to the boys in the front a box that contained a card, some tobacco and some cigarettes. And these were treasured by the boys because it meant a great deal to have a cigarette. A lot more important than having food. And cigarettes were swapped and exchanged. So if you were a non-smoker, you were able to get Christmas cake or sweets or whatever you wanted, because a cigarette was all important. So when a man lay dying on a stretcher, his mates would say to him, "What can we do for you?" And he would say, "Give me a cigarette." And I'm very privileged to have been given this by a man from Bathurst. "1918 was described as the home of mud. As you know, we're back in our old place," wrote Sid Kensit. "Well, dear, there's a great amount of fighting going on in Flanders now. It has shifted up here. But I suppose they will soon start down below again. I really hope they get a good thrashing. The British Army is putting up a great fight, but I tell you, we have had quite a strenuous time, and the weather has been awfully bad. I would like to tell you the whole of the news, but I can't. We have seen so much lately, something that the Australians will never forget. Yes, the whole army, and I will tell you when we get home. Now don't you think we're sticking to our battalion well? I have been through 18 months in the field, and I was only away for a week. And Percy has only been away for a small time, only that blighty leave. So we have seen a lot, haven't we? We have had some rough and tumble with Fritz lately, but the Australians are too good for him every time, and we are giving him an awful rough time of it, and doing excellent work. We are both well, and have not been relieved in the line so far, and have been in ever since January, and are holding our own here, in a very vital part. It has been very hot this last week, and yesterday and today turned terrible wet and cold. We have the Yanks now, and we're all great friends. I know I was never born lucky, although I have been extremely lucky over here. I wouldn't take all the money in the world to go through it again, what I've gone through. And I think now I will never tell anyone, or I know you wouldn't believe me. The Germans are making great hits on this front, but I think he will soon pull out, as he must be suffering terrible losses over there. We have been in one of the most vital parts for so long. Of course, I can never give you real news as with regards to the offensive. I wouldn't like to say more. What the eye don't see, the heart don't grieve.